Hello, today I'll be reading from Psalm chapter 77, verses 1 through 3 in the ESV. I cry aloud to God, and he will hear me. In the day of my trouble I seek the Lord. In the night my hand is stretched out without wearying. My soul refuses to be comforted. When I remember God, I moan. When I meditate, my spirit faints.
Good morning, church. A few weeks ago, I started to think about when is the sun going to shine again. These days, last maybe 4 weeks, have been really cold and cloudy. And a thought started to come in my head of where in the Bible could I find a scripture that would best be able to describe how we feel. I know that all of us in this auditorium are here because we were born of a woman. And the Bible told us if that's true, our days will be filled with trouble. 2,000 years ago, a baby was born, and that child came to this world, also born of a woman, but unlike any other child, nobody could ever make up what happened. That God in the flesh would walk in this world. And our hope would not be in that baby. Our hope would be in who the baby became. That baby became our Christ. That baby taught us that yes, you can be born in this world, but you can be reborn out of this world. And he did that by dying on a cross. That was not it. That was the beginning of it. By being buried in a tomb, and then resurrecting and telling us this is the gospel, this is the death, burial, and resurrection. And while your life is going to be full of trouble, there is a way to get out of it. There is a way to change, not just circumstances, but change your attitude, change your mind, change the voice that you have. You know, we're taking a long journey with Steve through Job. And we've started to look at all the trouble that Job will have. And we can look at the trouble that we're going to have. And we can even look at the trouble that Christ had. Think about the trouble that Christ had. Even from birth, just soon after he is born, somebody's trying to kill him. How many of you enjoy having international neighbors all the time? I told you about 3-4 years ago, we're going to have so many international neighbors that some people will have a thing called xenophobia. Well, this is who Jesus was. He was an international refugee in a foreign country. They probably didn't want him. His own birth country wanted to kill him. And then he keeps growing and he grows, but there's something different from him. He grows in wisdom, right? And he has all the temptations that you and I have, but he has a perfect life. That's unheard of. That's impossible. And so he gives us a way to change. And I hope that today, as you look at his life, that you will consider getting out of this world. Because if you're stuck in this world, you're in a whole bunch of trouble. You can be in this world, but you don't have to be of the world. And that's what we have to figure out as we go through this lesson today. Many years ago, there was a man who was known as the hero of the Lost Battalion. He got trapped behind enemy lines, and eventually, by getting his whole battalion out, he was awarded the Medal of Honor. His name was Charles Whittlesey. Charles Whittlesey, soon after he had been given a huge honor, he was one of the pallbearers, the original pallbearers for the first unknown soldier that was buried. And so he did that, and just 10 days after that, he stepped off the back of a cruise ship and killed himself. How did that happen? How did a person get so depressed that he couldn't hear anything else but one voice? And that's what we want to look at today. And Psalm 77 is your key to getting out of the cold days, the cold, cloudy days. In fact, not just getting out of them, but crushing them. And so if you have your Bibles, open to Psalm 77. And thank you, Eli, for the reading of God's Word, verses 1 through 3. We're going to go all the way through to verse 20. The first thing we want to do is make a superficial list of your problems. So if you could tell me what your problems were, In 10 words or less, what would you say? And this is actually key to getting something out the lesson. Imagine it's just you and me. And I'm looking just at you and I'm asking you, what are you struggling with? What is your difficulty? What is your challenge? Label it. It doesn't need to be accurate, doesn't need to exactly be what it is, but what is the one thing that your brain keeps going back to? I can never get better. I will never improve. I will never get out of anxiety or out of depression or out of timidity or fear or psychosis or PTSD, whatever you're struggling with. Just get that out and put it on paper as this is what I'm struggling with. On a Friday, actually, maybe it was Wednesday, I went to see a doctor. And this doctor was going to tell me what I need to have in early January when I'll have surgery on my eye. And he said, the lady is the nurse, as I was walking there, she said, remind me, what are you struggling with? And I thought, okay, that's a pretty good question. I need to remember that. She says she might have it wrong. And I told her, well, she asked in a way to tell her when my original injury was, and I told her my original injury was in 1983 while I was in a war zone. And so that reminded her immediately that I knew it was this eye, and I knew why I have a cataract over this eye and all the things that have gone wrong with that eye. What is the one thing you're struggling with? You need to get it right because you might have surgery on the wrong eye, as it were. So let's go ahead and look at that. And let's see, just superficially, what is the problem that Asaph is saying that he has. Now, Asaph wrote about at least 10 of the Psalms. And in these 10 Psalms, he's going to tell us what goes on in his heart. He was part of the Levitical tribe, and probably the Asaph family came out of Asaph. He was one of David's original worship leaders. And so this man was not just a songwriter, but he also would be a praise worship leader. And so this is a very, very spiritual man. But like so many song leaders I've known, he's in contact with his emotions. And he's raw in what he's going to tell us is going on here. And so he says here, I cry aloud to God, and he will hear me. The first thing you've got to do is understand that it is important to you to know that you can cry out to God. And this is not just a normal tone of voice where you call. This is like really crying. Have you ever been at a funeral and somebody lost it? And somebody just started to cry and maybe hysterically shriek. And what did everybody do? Ran to calm them down. Don't do that. That's okay. And it's as if we're worried that everybody would start shrieking hysterically. And I'm thinking, well, that's kind of okay. If there's ever going to be a time when our community, when our people will say, you can scream to the Lord, it's at a funeral. And you've got to do that. You've got to get that energy out. And so if all you're doing right now is writing it out on a piece of paper, if you can scream it out to the Lord with your soul and with your spirit, as we'll see as we go through these verses, let God know what your problem is. Why? Because that's what Asaph did. That's where you start when you deal with your problems, when you deal with these cold, cloudy days. I cry aloud to God, and he will hear me. In the day of my trouble, I seek the Lord. So far you can see a lot of pronouns. I cry, and he will hear me and my trouble. I seek the Lord. And then he also says something that might have slipped you. There's two bookends here. And he's talking about what happens in the day and what happens at night. And the ESV has covered it up a little bit, but it's pretty clear in the Hebrew. He's talking about the day. In the day, all day I have trouble. All night I have trouble. I cannot sleep. I've lost my voice. All these things he's going to say. And if you've ever been to a point in your life where your trouble is so great that you cannot sleep at night, you'll know what Asaph is feeling over here. In the day of my trouble, I seek the Lord. In the night, my hands are stretched out without wearing. And whenever you hear the idea of stretching out the hand, you kind of got the idea of Asaph is praying to God. Because of this, many people want to make that a plural, but it's a singular, and so you're not sure, is he shaking his fist at God, or is he, but this is definitely a prayer to God. He's calling out to God. And he says, I do it without wearing. Yes, obviously his arm will get tired, but it's metaphorically. He's persistent in his crying out to God. And at least you know he's doing the right thing here. He's had trouble before, and he knows this works. My soul refuses to be comforted. My soul, can you imagine how bad it must be if your soul cannot get comfort? And then he says this, when I remember God. Again, this worked in the past. Prayer worked in the past. And I'd like to think that part of the way he was praying might even have been praising God, might have been singing to God. But when he remembers God, his soul moans. Have you ever had like a veil of guilt in your life? A veil of guilt? And you just can't shake it? And whenever you get close to God, how does that make you feel? It's almost as if this is what he's talking about. It's almost as if whatever's happening and whatever, maybe it's the Bible says be anxious for nothing, and he knows he shouldn't be anxious, but he can't shake the feeling of anxiety. The Bible says that we shouldn't be all constantly depressed. We should, by confession, let things go and then live in the moment with God. And he just can't shake this idea of how people have hurt him in the past. And so he says, when I remember God, I moan. When I meditate, my spirit faints. Now you have both the soul and the spirit mensch. Rauch and nefesh. Both are involved here. The whole person is involved in trying to get out of this. And so it's very clear what he's just said here is I'm really, really struggling. Here is a songwriter. Somebody who had written songs that were upbeat and worshiping God, and now his song is one of extreme pain. There's a country and western singer that is known to lead very upbeat type of songs, but he's got one song called AA, and his name is Walker Hayes, and this is what he writes. The day we buried our daughter Oakley, who was our 7th child, I sat in an AA meeting that night. I could still see the dirt on my shoe from her grave that we had filled in. Where's he looking, up or down? He's looking down, right? He is in a very, very bad place. He has been sober for 2 years. Things are about to go very, very wrong in his life. But he finds himself in an AA meeting. And man, an AA meeting just saved my life. After he left that grave, he went to the bar that he had frequented all his life. And as he crossed the road to this bar, he did what he would always do as he used to have that life. He would feel for his wallet, and his wallet wasn't there. And he went back home. And that's where the story picks up. When I walked in my house, and I was so ashamed, I saw my wife on the couch all by herself. I was like, I'm so sorry. You know, I left her alone to go and self-destruct. And she helped me. That night, she helped me find an AA meeting in Williamson County. I don't know what's going to happen in our lives, but I know this life, for all of us born of woman, our lives are going to be filled with trouble. There are going to be pockets of high things and very, very deep valleys. And there's going to be a lot of our journey that's going to be kind of okay. And then you have these cold, gray days, and we just need a little bit of a bump, and things go really bad. As I finished writing this lesson, it was in the evening, early on this week, I got a text message. And the text message said, please send out a prayer request. My brother's coded twice. They just can't keep his heart going. So I quickly sent out a message. 2 to 4 minutes later, I checked to see whether there's any updates, and there was. And the message simply stated, he's gone. I sent a message back and I waited. And then a reply came about 10, 15, 20 minutes later. My brothers with my dad and with Jesus. Had the circumstances changed? No. Had the person's heart adapted to the reality of what comfort God gives us? Absolutely. Absolutely. You see, in the darkest valley, you as a Christian sitting here, if you're not in this world, or if you're not of the world, but you're in the world, you can look at this differently. And there's going to be a very, very subtle truth that you're going to get if you go through Psalm 77. It's going to be very loud if you're looking for it. And that's why I'm trying to emphasize. And I'm trying to emphasize as I go through this. Let me just go back quickly. Let me try one more time. It's not going back. You just got to click the mouse back over there. Sometimes the mouse gets off the screen. Okay, there we go. So let me just go back there. So look at the personal pronouns. And that's going to be half the problem. When you start with a problem with God, it's going to be all about you. I mean, how can it not be? You've just had this incredible tragedy. I cry. He will hear me. The day of my trouble, I seek my hands. My soul, I moan, my spirit faints. And now we go on to this one, and look where it picks up again. Superficially now, list your past prosperity. Look for any good memory that you have. So once you've written down what your trouble is, write down one little ray of hope, one little good memory you had. What is the most powerful, positive memory you have in your life? For Dwayne and I, it might be the day we held our firstborn in 1988. And we looked into his eyes. It was 7 o'clock, 7:30. It was Boksburg Benoni Hospital. Dr. van der Merwe was the doctor. And I remember the sights and the sounds. I remember everything because that is one of my positive memories I have. And that's one of the things, the rays of hope, when things are really bad, I need to go back and I need to remember stuff. But look again as we go to this. Look at the language. You see what he's saying there? We pick it up. It's my eyelids, I am, I cannot, I consider, me, let me remember my song, me meditate, my heart, my spirit. You cannot but do that when things are really, really hard. But the subtle truth is you need to change the internal talk you have as quick as possible. You cannot hear God's voice and your voice at the same time. From early on in our development as humans, we start to develop self-talk. By the age of 9, our self-talk is really, really good. But then we get into the ages of 12 and 13, and all types of things become to our knowledge when we get the knowledge of good and evil. And the devil really starts to mix with our self-talk and the sins of the world. But let's start with verse 4. It says here, you hold my eyelids open. I'm so troubled I cannot speak. Is this guy sleeping at night? And when he wakes up, is he able to speak? Or if he had words that had come out of his mouth, would they be coherent? It would be as if he's got a fog, as if his life is completely chaotic. He wouldn't be able to make sense of much. And it's at this point that you know Asaph, whatever's going on in his life, it's really bad. And I really like the fact that we don't know for sure what went through his life, because we can identify with whatever we're dealing with. I consider the days of old, the years long ago. You see the word remember and meditate there? Because he's starting to remember and he's starting to meditate on what happened. Let me remember my song in the night. Let me meditate in my heart. Then my spirit made a diligent search. So he was doing the right thing. He was realizing he's in a whole heap of trouble, and he knew what had worked before is he went to that positive memory. He went to that song in the night. Do you have a song in the night? Do you have a praise song that you sing in the night? I remember it as if it was yesterday. We were all sitting in the Fuller's backyard, and there's this half-moon type of array of chairs, and Adam's feet in the flames, and Adam, the yellow light is coming on all of us, and we're singing songs, and Robert and Daryl are cutting up because they're really enjoying the singing. Remember that? They were having so much fun with those songs, and the more they were having fun with the songs, the more contagious it was, and we started to have fun with the songs, and what we were doing. What were we doing? We were praising God. Remember that? We've had some times like that. I've got a lot of memories of when I've had a song in the night. I've got a ready song in the night. I can start singing any time. And it's my go-to song. It's song 801. Once I stood in the night so dark as could be. That is my song in the night. And so he's remembering that song in the night, and there's so many good memories attached to that. He says, let me meditate in my heart. So he starts to do the right thing, right? He's meditating his heart, but as he starts to do this, that memory starts to go away, and the next wave of bitterness is going to come on him. Then my spirit made a diligent search, and you're going to be shocked at what his spirit was searching. His spirit started to question the character of God. Have you ever been in such a dark place that you question the character of God? That would lead you to question the reality of God, possibly. But that's exactly what he starts to do over here. And so we see that the dig list, the first superficial list is just what's going on. But now, what good is happened in the past, then it will lead to, let's really get real with God. Let's ask these questions, Steve, that Job asked God. His circumstances not changing, right? But asking these questions is going to change his heart. But if he had never asked these questions, he would never have worked through it. And so Job is going to be the best example for us to go to see what's happening here. So look at how he questions the character of God. Is God always going to spurn? Is God going to lose his steadfast love? Is God's promises going to keep failing? Is God not going to be gracious? Is God not going to be compassionate? Do you really want to say that to God? And that's what he's doing. And I'm so thankful that Asaph tells us we can do that. God's okay with us to do that. God's not okay with us gossiping to Satan about him, but God's okay if we talk to him about this. So let's assume the best intentions for Asaph. Let's assume he wasn't really asking about the character of God. Then let's assume that his life was in such a mess that he was so far from salvation that he thought he could never get back. That would also work as we go through these verses. Will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable? In other words, will the Lord always be angry with me and never again be favorable to me? Has his steadfast love forever ceased? Do you see that that's not possible? Can you see that it just doesn't make... Can his steadfast, that's something that's always going to be there, is his steadfast love going to cease? It's impossible, right? And so in the mere definition of what steadfast love is, it cannot make sense. Are his promises at an end for all time? Have I messed up so much? Am I in such a dark place that his promises will never again be real to me? Maybe that's what he's saying. Has God forgotten to be gracious? No, I start to have a problem with that one. Asaph, if you've messed up, don't blame somebody else. Don't blame God. You need to get your life right, because God cannot forget to be gracious. We just have to be at a point where his grace can reach us. Has his anger shut up his compassion? Can God's anger get to a point where he'll shut up his compassion? I know that God is always kind to those who obey him, but I know he's severe to those who disobey him, and that's Romans 11:22. He will never change in that. So some of this I can see. But what is actually happening over here is his language is starting to change. It was all about I, and me. That's his internal voice. Now it's going to possibly being blaming God. God's doing this, God's not doing that. And then it's going to have a mixture, and things are going to change around quite a bit as we get into verse 10. And you're going to see him start to say, this is who I am, but this is who God is. And by the time you go to verse 16, it's all about God. So it's a very subtle truth that I really want you to take with you today. I want you to get this one. If you're going to get out of dark shadows, you're going to have to change the inside voice, your self-talk. You're going to have to stop talking to yourself, I, and start talking to God, and then let God talk to you through the Word, and it will be all about God. And that's when the change is going to happen. That's what happened in Job's life. That's what happened in that text message I was busy with early on the week. It changed so quick. I was so proud. But look at starting verse 10 right now. And this is the last section. We're going to dig the dig list, and this is God's praiseworthy past. So if your life is a mess and you can't get back out of it, you can reflect back on what God did. What is the most incredible thing that God did? For us, it has to be a child that came into this world, that lived, that started to get wise, and all the things I talked to you about until his death, burial, and resurrection. That has to be our greatest story. But their greatest story was coming out of Egypt. And so he says here in verse 10, then I said, I will appeal to this, to the years of the right hand of the Most High. You see how his thinking is starting to come right? And just for Robert's sake, I will say that there's a funny translation here. The ESV, the King James Version, and the New King James might have missed it. But we're going to go with this because in context I can see it. But they get this translation by pulling a word from verse 11. So let's go with what the ESV is saying there. Then I said, I will appeal to this, to the years of the right hand. That's the power of the Most High. Who's at the right hand of God right now? Jesus. Who can we appeal to right now? Jesus. We have so many more tools than what they had. I will, and now look again. Sorry, let me go to the text. Look at what he's doing. Remember, ponder, meditate. See what he's doing? It's pretty clear. You can't miss it. He's going to have to get a voice other than the one in his head. Because the one in his head is stinking thinking. The one in his head is in a rut and it will not get out. Every single thought is about what people did wrong to him or how he's never going to get rid of anxiety or how, it's just constant. He's never going to be successful. He's never going to amount to anything or whatever it is. You've got to get rid of that. The best way to get rid of that is to stop your voice and let God's voice start speaking. And so you'll see its first few verses, it's him and God mingled, and then it'll just be God. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your wonders, not my wonders anymore, your wonders of old. I will ponder all your work and meditate on your mighty deeds. Your way, O God, is holy. What God is great like our God? You are the God who works wonders. You have made known your might among the people. You, with your arm, redeemed your people, the children of Jacob and Joseph, Selah, exclamation mark. See how it's now it's not anything to do with his voice anymore. Now it's completely God's voice. And it's such a subtle shift that it's possible to miss it. Even when he talks about Jacob and Joseph. Where was Joseph? Was Joseph in captivity? Where was Jacob? Was Jacob in captivity? No, Jacob was still in the land of the promise. Where was Joseph? Joseph was in captivity. And so you can start seeing this, and he's going to end with the words Moses and Aaron at verse 20. And then he's going to take us completely, starting now, through Egypt and out of captivity. And so that's going to be the next big thing that we're going to see over here. Look at verse 16. When the waters, clouds, thunders, lightning, sea. You see, what is he talking about? He's talking about the Red Sea. He's talking about the enemy behind and no path in front. We're not going to get out of this. So God, how come you brought us to this point? We have enemy pressing behind us. We're the Red Sea. We trapped. Pharaoh is coming. Oh, that you would have left us in Egypt. But now we're going to be killed. And what did God tell Moses to tell the people? Stand still and you will see the wonders of your God. Meditate on what God has done. Now, Asaph is not there. Asaph is remembering what happened, and somehow it's changing his self-talk. It's changing his attitude. Circumstances are still exactly the same, but his attitude is busy changing. When the waters saw you, O God, when the waters saw you, they were afraid. Indeed, the deep trembled. The clouds poured out water. The skies gave forth thunder. And so again, you can see the waters in the heavens and the waters on earth. They are so scared. It's like the Hebrew word is they're twisting. They're twisting on themselves. The water is twisting. Your arrows flashed on every side. The crash of your thunder was in the whirlwind. Your lightnings lifted up the world, lighted up the world. The earth trembled and shook. Your way was through the sea. Your way was through the sea. Remember your Devo, Steve, on Wednesday? Remember what you talked about, the Stoic philosophy, about the solution? Can you remember what you said? The solution is what? The obstacle is the way. What? You kidding me? I've got the sea in front of me, the enemy behind me, and I'm going to go through this? No way. It's not going to happen. There's going to be no evidence. God's going to leave no footprints. Only faith is going to get you through this. And that's what is happening. And by the way, he started with faith because he said, I know my God's going to hear me. And then he mentions Adonai, but now he's mentioned Yah or Yahweh as he comes to this section. And so he says here, the waters saw you, O God, the waters saw you, they were afraid indeed, the deep trembled, the clouds poured out water, the skies gave forth thunder, your arrows flashed from every side, the crash of your thunder was in the whirlwind, the twisting, in other words, your lightnings lighted up the world, the earth trembled and shook, and here it is, your way was through the sea. Your way was through the sea, your path through the great waters. Yet your footprints were unseen. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. Unbelievable. And that is what he's doing. A few years ago, there was a man who was climbing Mount Rainier, and he came to this snow bridge. And he crossed the snow bridge, and as he crossed the bridge gave way. And he fell into a very dark crevice. He had hardly any equipment with him when he reached the bottom. He was bloodied and broken and bleeding. Yet he got out. How did he get out? This is what he said, and it's in a book called The Ledge. So this is what Jim Davis says. He said, he reflected on his childhood and recalled how his father had repeatedly reminded him that he could, listen to this, he could accomplish great things if he pressed through adversity. He could accomplish great things if he pressed through adversity. I promise you this, if he kept his internal voice, woe is me, he would never have gotten out of that cold, pitch dark cave that he was in. He had to start listening to a voice outside of him. And the voice outside of him said, when the occasion demands it, the Summit Church of Christ will rise up and we will press through. We will not let it get us down. There's going to come a time that you're going to be in a valley and you're going to have to decide what you're going to do. You're going to have to decide whether you're going to work through this. Psalm 77, it's an easy psalm to remember. I hope you'll always remember how Asaph got through this. And it's very subtle. He changed the voice from what was inside of him to the voice that was from outside. And he went back to what God had done in his past. Not in Asaph's past, but in the past of the history of the nation of Israel. Are you ready to lean on the everlasting arms of Jesus? Are you ready to give up your problems? He promised you he will take your burdens from you. You can lean on him. This week I got a letter from somebody based on the service that we render here at Summit for people who struggle. It was from somebody who said that they've been struggling with anxiety and depression for 10 to 12 years. And said that before coming into contact with what we're doing here, this person was without hope and the quality of life was greatly diminished. But all that has happened is this person has learned to listen to a voice other than the one that's inside of them. You can get all the diagnosis you want to, you can get all the prescriptions you want to, but until you start to listen to the voice of God, the solution is going to be temporary. If you want the permanent solution, look towards the Christ child that came to this world, that died on a cross, was buried, and that resurrected. And he tells you today, if you will be born again, you can get out of this world. Anybody know when they're going to die? Anybody? I hope and pray you're not still in this world or of this world when that happens. Are you ready to make the commitment? Are you ready to give God your life? If you want to do that by being born again, if you want to do it just by coming forward because you've already been born again, ask the elders for their prayers. Please accept this invitation by coming forward right now as together we stand and sing.